Hello and welcome back to Lard TV, where we're continuing with our build project of what's now a builder's yard, was the Blacksmith building from Dark Ops, which we took as our basic model, but we're now working with that to build that up. Right, well, we've got to a really important juncture last time where we pretty much had our walls in place, where we put in the different aspects in the builder's yard. So the next stage really was to get this ready for painting. The building itself and the base are going to be painted separately. At this point in time, what I wanted to do was to put down some grit around the edges of the walls, both on the outside and then inside the yard itself, to really just blend in, if you like, where the cobbles meet the wall, or where the external base meets the wall. Just an opportunity to add just a bit of grit and grime that will have the building, the base, then ready for painting. And at that point I took the main building off so that I could really get on with undercoating that, because I want to paint the main building separately from the base. What I did was I applied a black undercoat, which is spray on undercoat. I then went on to add a basic colour of this, which is bitter chocolate. This is a weather coat, it's a smooth masonry paint designed for household external works, but I find it gives a nice base colour to work up from. Especially when you're doing buildings, I find a brown a kinder base colour than the black, as we will see. So, moving on with the next phase, what I've done is I have started applying the next coat of paint to the model. Now, what I like to do there is use a real mix of paints. I still very much use the masonry paint when I'm painting, because often what I'll do is, to get things to blend in with the brown on the model, is I'll take this and mix it with the next colour up, and that then allows you to get a real blend of tones. But the other types of thing I'm using are these sort of standard match pots, or maybe some of this acrylic paint, this is a Winsor & Newton Galleria, which is a Galleria, whatever you want to call it, and basics paints like this. Now, what I like to do actually is start with a relatively strong colour. So here you can see on my palette that I've used this pretty bright yellow, but to make that blend in more, I've mixed it in with my brown. And what I've done is I've then applied that to the model. The first thing I did actually was go over the stonework on this model in a more of a tan beige colour, just to provide the basic colours for that. And then following on from that, I used a large brush, this size, so I don't know what that is, that's about a 1-inch brush, which I then applied the yellow and brown mix on there to give a really strong basic colour for the plasterwork. It's not going to end up that colour, it's going to go a lot lighter, but you can see exactly the same effect on the walls there. The thing with these domestic paints is they're not as thin, they're not as heavily pigmented as you would find with wargaming paints. So you will find that sometimes the coats can go on but be quite wishy-washy, and you're going to see the colours coming through from underneath. Well, actually that's no terrible thing, because that helps with that blending process. And as we build up, we're going lighter and lighter and gradually lighter the whole time, which will end us up with a nice model with a lot of depth to it. What I'm going to do now is just add a bit of a beige colour, but the important thing to remember is I'm trying to tie this in so that each layer mixes in with the one that's gone on previously. So I'm going to add a bit of my bright yellow to that. This time, remember the first time I said I added the brown in with that yellow. I'm not going to do that this time. I'm just going to add this beige and the yellow together to get more of a creamy look. This is totally imprecise. I'm not worried about going over lines or bumping into anything else. It's just a case of getting the colour on. We're going to go back and do some much finer detail later, but at this point in time it's just important to get that really quite rich base colour on. Lighter stone grey here. This is pale sandstone from Weathercote, which again is an external masonry paint. Now, all these paints are still very wet, but that does, as I'm putting it on, you can see it's actually, you're getting a blend as you go. So there we have it, a very quick rough coat of paint, which you can see there's a lot of depth coming out there, but we're starting to work up to a much lighter colour finish. What I'm going to do now is I put those paints on together quite quickly so that they will blend in as they go, so we've got a lot of flavour happening there, a lot of different colours swirling in. And then once that is dry now, I want that to dry, I'm going to go back on with the lighter colours. So we're going to see our plaster looking a lot lighter on the flat areas, whereas at the edges it's going to start looking discoloured and crumbly, and that yellow age of that yellow look of age, which I think is going to give the building a real character. But it's really now a case of letting that dry. Domestic paint dries a lot more slowly than the stuff we use for painting figures, so it's just a case of being patient and giving that an hour or so until the point where it's at least touch dry. It actually continues to cure household paint for about 2 days, but as long as the surface is dry, you can put the next coat on, especially as we're doing it with a small brush. Yeah, there we are. So we're starting to see that building really coming together and the yard there taking shape. Again, we've got quite a few areas where we've got paint, where we don't want paint, but that's fine. We can go over that and deal with that as we go forward. Okay, now that's dry, what I've done is I've just given it another quick coat of the pale sandstone just to highlight it off and really give it a finish. I think one of the best shots you can see of it is here on this wall here, where you're actually seeing the depth of tonality there. Now, one of the things I was thinking about as I was doing this is how this would work really well for something like a typical Belgian farmhouse of the Waterloo period. We can see that rather than just painting it white, by having that depth of colour, you still, from a distance, can see it as a white house, a white building, but when you get close, you've got that depth with that rich yellow and brown, and then building up to that light sandstone finish that really does, I think, create an effective look. Anyway, that's just me. Of course, one of the things that we've done is in doing that we've slapped a lot of paint on in places that we don't particularly want it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get a more precise brush, not small at all, but slightly more precise than the big 1-inch brush we've been using, and go back to our brown, and I think I'm going to add a little bit of water this time to get that on there, and I'm going to go back and cover some of the areas that where we've got paint on that we don't want, and then we can start building that blockwork up, because what I want to do there is create some very subtle differences by using different shades of tans and browns and maybe sandstone colours, just to create some interest visually there. Okay, so there we have it. We've gone over that and we've touched it up where we've gone over. So the next phase now is going to be to start working on the stonework. I've got a slightly smaller sort of 1/2-inch brush for dry brushing, which I'm going to use with some other sort of buff type colours. Now here I am going to use a mixture of the domestic paints, but mainly I'm looking at the Vallejos here because we're not using quite the amount here. So I think I'm going in with a German camouflage beige as my base colour to mix in with that bit of that brown, just so we get a colour mix. Slightly different colour into the mix because we want tonal variation. We don't necessarily want it to be completely and utterly contrasting and clashing. Natural stone does vary in tone, so we want to capture some of that variety. to remember when applying this whole myriad of exciting different tones is don't get too bogged down in the detail. This is literally a base that's going to give us a degree of tonality. So it's going to start looking a bit odd, it's going to look a bit chessboardy in terms of like there's too much contrast. But don't worry about that, because what we're going to do then is we're going to go back to our sandstone, what is it, pale sandstone. We're going to create a very, very thin dry brush by getting our brush, putting it in and then drying it out on here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go over the model and we're literally just going to dry brush over all of that stonework. And we're really going to rub it in. But this is going to be I've really dried the brush out here. But this is going to really tie in all those colours and create almost like a dust-like film over the top. And because we're using the same colour for this dry brush as we are for the plaster, the two things tie in together looking very, very natural, but we've still got that beautiful contrast between that stonework and the plaster work. And there are some areas that we're going to do different things with, and there are some areas that I've left intentionally without doing stuff with, because I'm actually going to put brickwork paper on these, because I think this would be a brickwork addition that's been added in. And again, it's lovely to have that contrast between the different building materials. So what I need to do now is think about what colour I'm going to do my coping stones and get my stonework right, because I'm going to match the coping stones with the stone top on this loading bay and the stones on these stairs. So I'm just probably going to have a bit of an experiment with colour, try out a few different ideas and then come back to you and we'll have a look at that. Okay, what I've decided to do is go with a colour that's this sort of beige colour, which I've mixed up from the buff titanium from Galleria, but I've also added some of the weathercoat brown, because again, keeping that consistency of colours and variance on the colours does allow all of these to marry in nicely together. And the reason I've chosen this colour is that in its own right it's a bit meh, but once it is dry brushed, I think it's going to give us a really nice light stone colour. Okay, so what I'm looking to do now is add some detail. I've just brushed some sand colour onto the pile of sand. I just used an Iraqi sand. It's not ideal. I think I'm probably going to give that some kind of reddish wash and then dry brush it up again. But the main thing is I have got the basic sand down. So I'm just going to use a big pot of black paint mixed in with a bit of this pale sandstone to create a greyish colour, with which I'm going to paint the pile of rocks, but also the cobbles. My recommendation generally with dry brushing is to start fairly dark and close to the base colour, because you can always dry brush up and lighten it up as you go. So this should be pretty straightforward, because these cobbles are very nicely done. Right, a couple of things I've messed up here. I've got to add a bit of black here to cover up some of these places where our wall colour has gone over onto that. But that's fairly easy, it won't stop us doing our dry brushing. We'll just dip the brush in the black paint and then we can come back to that, because remember we're going to be putting a lot of stuff like weeds and maybe bits of dirt or whatever on this, so it's going to have a fair variation. Not that much variation, that was not the plan. It's going to have a fair bit of variation tonally. Right, okay, that was a complete cock up. So the best thing to do there would be to leave that alone and get back to it, but of course I don't really have the patience for that, so I'm just going to go over that in black. And go over it now. I'm going to have to let that dry. What we'll do is we'll just go over those stones. Aggregate really isn't grey at all, but it's much more reds and browns and tans. But for the sake of this, we're going to go in and give it a dark grey undercoat, and then we can always go back and add something to it. But a lot of the time, like everything, you know, in producing Wargames terrain, we're producing almost a film set. It doesn't have to look like precisely what it would look like in reality, but what it has to do is tell us a story whereby we know what it is. And for most people, rocks are grey. Okay, we'll come back to that. Now, what else have we been doing? What I've done here is I've just gone around and I've added a little wash in green over the windows and well, all the woodwork really. What I don't want to do is to create something that looks like it's brand new. So I've washed, I intentionally got it to look streaky, and then I've dry brushed over that once again with exactly the same colour. And the other thing I've done here is I've gone around and I've done this sign, which we are going to be putting up here once everything is dry. But that again is using that same green from the woodwork. So there we are. Next thing to do on this really is going to be add the wallpaper to look like brickwork. So I think I'm going to go away and get that ready while I allow my cobbles to dry for a bit longer. So here we have our brick paper, and what we're going to do is now cut this to fit the shape we want. I could use a create paper template, but I'm not going to because this should be relatively easy. Famous last words, of course. So what I'm going to do is just, the nice thing about this paper is actually it's very, very flexible. So we're just going to cut in the areas we want, and once again the great thing with paper is you can just fold it to find out where it goes, and then of course it's got the brickwork lines on it that are going to allow us to get straight lines. Right, so that should give us our basic shape there. It's too deep, but that's fine. We can just put that there, and again I'm just going to use my thumb to tell me exactly where it is. So I can see from that I need to take, it looks like 2 courses of bricks off the bottom of that sheet of paper, and could do another half a course. But the great thing is, being brick paper, we've got all the guidelines on the piece of paper, and we can just cut it until we get it to the right size and shape. That's the top step. So rather than try and do it all at once, I'm going to cut that away, cut that away. So that top step's fitting. That next step down is not bad. So we've got another line to put in there. And another line to put in there. So we're just going to work our way down the steps one at a time. Okay, we can see there that what we've got there is a bit of a wobbly old brick staircase. Good thing is there's actually going to be a wall here, so this bit where I filled this in roughly at the back there and it's all a bit wobbly is not going to be seen. But that gives a pretty nice look, I think, and that's certainly the look we're looking for. So I'm going to repeat that around here on the loading bay. Okay, so there we have it, a loading bay with brick steps. What I'll do when that's all dry is I'm going to distress that a bit with a bit of a wash, but ultimately it's starting to look good. So I'm going to leave that to dry and I'm going to move on to doing some more detail on the big base. So the next phase for me is going to be to finish off making a mess of the cobbles. Okay, we'll let that dry. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dry brush this over with exactly the same pale sandstone. So again, we're bringing the whole thing together, binding the whole thing together. I'll just go over those rocks because, as we know, we're going to get them grey. And then while that's drying, I'm going to go over some of the detail, which I'm going to go over in black. So some of the railings, for example, have got some paint on them. We're just going to work over those in black because I think black is the colour we're going to be using for them. I mean, it is possible that you might see these painted, but I think black is the colour I've set my mind on. So I'll just tidy up these messy bits. I love it when a plan comes together, and this one certainly seems to be doing so. At the moment, our building is looking pretty good, and we're now getting to the point where I've been adding some details onto the base, and excitingly this hot glue gun is now going to do the work, and we're going to put the two together because we can slot that in there, and then what we want to do is start just putting a little bit of dirt around the edges so that the building blends in with the base. Once that's done, we'll have to put a little bit of a brown base coat on that and then dry brush up from that, and then when that's all done, then we can go back to putting in the final dust down, very light dry brushes of that pale stone colour to really tie the whole thing together. And then once we've got that, we can look at adding some little bits of detail, and that's going to be a case of going through the spares box and seeing exactly what we can find. But I like the idea of taking what my good friend and colleague Nick did with his Monsieur Aubergine's garage and creating some small bases full of clutter. So maybe some road signs, maybe some pickaxes, maybe some piles of bricks, stuff like that. But that's something we're going to look at then. And of course I've still got the big issue of dealing with the roof and deciding just exactly what I'm going to do with that. And finally, once it's all tied together, I want to do a little bit of distressing and weathering to really make it all look a bit more lived in. So let's get that hot glue gun and see how we go. A liberal application of hot glue. There we go, we're going to add our new stick in there. And I try and be quite generous, but keep it away from the edges in particular, because I don't want it seeping out. So as we can see, lining that up as much as possible with the cobbling that's in there. So now, as I mentioned before, it's going to be a case of getting some fine grit and adding that around those edges to create a link in, a tie in. So let's do that. In one or two places where it fits, where it touches, so to speak, it's going to be necessary to add a little bit more of that just to get that general lived-in look. But the most important thing is now we're kind of getting it all together. We're seeing how our builder's yard is going to look. We're going to get that signage on as well, which I think I might well do in a minute while you're not looking, because it's a bit boring seeing me doing that. And then, well, we'll come back and see where we get to. I think we're going to be looking at tying everything there in together, doing the final dust over with the dry brush, and then putting stuff down like weeds growing through among the cobbles. But this is really starting to look exactly the way that I'd envisaged it. So there we are, that's the bulk of the model finished. We've obviously still got to think about the roof and what we're going to do with that, so we're going to leave that till next time. In the meantime, thanks for watching. We hope you've enjoyed this. Don't forget, any questions, just put them below. We'll try and get them answered. And don't forget to follow Lard TV so you can keep up to date with all the new videos that we've got coming out for you to enjoy. So thanks again for watching. Cheerio.